Welcome to Byrna's Hot Take, where we discuss tactics, tips, and training so that if the time comes, you are prepared to defend. So on today's episode, I am here again with Luan, and we've got a slightly special episode for you guys. Definitely not our typical episode where we invite on a guest. I guess you could say we have a guest by proxy, but unfortunately, he did not want to participate on the show. So pretty recently, we were notified of a video review out there by an attorney by the name of Andrew Byrna over at the Law of Self-Defense YouTube channel. And he basically goes through a review of Byrna from his POV, and unfortunately, it seems that there was, several misconceptions and just erroneous information and things that were taken very much out of context. And we attempted to contact Andrew and comment on his video and get him to come on the show so that we could have a discussion about some of those things, but unfortunately, he declined and has deleted our comments since. So we wanted to take this time and go over some of the things that were said in that video just to make sure that we can educate the Byrna Nation, on the things that are erroneous and the things that are taken out of context, and give some context and explanation to those so that we make sure that you guys are getting the best information out there. Luan, you have anything to add on that?
Yes. So although we respect everyone's views and opinions on the subject of self-defense, it is not a black or white, one thing or the other type of proposition. We believe in having all types of options, and so we wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to articulate our side of the perspective, if you will, and give folks out there who are making these critical decisions about their personal safety that they have all the information that they need to make the right call.
Very well put. I think that's a great way to put it. So if you go and take a look at this, you'll see that the overarching concept that he talks about a lot is he clearly does a lot of defense on deadly force and carrying a gun and utilizing deadly force and that aspect. But obviously, we're dealing with a completely different type of force here at Byrna, and it's all about that less lethal, and it's all about having options to force so that you don't have to resort to deadly force unless you have to resort to deadly force. And I think that's the premise. And unfortunately, I think he mixes in a lot of those deadly force scenarios with Byrna products, in which case they're not intended. We've always said at the company that Byrna products are not intended to replace your firearm. They're intended to give you options, to supplement your ability to have options to use different types of force when those are necessary. And unfortunately, I just don't think that comes across in his show. And we'll kind of get into some of those here in just a few minutes.
User may think they're using a non-lethal Byrna pistol, but in fact be using a real 9mm pistol. Have we seen that kind of mistake made before? Does anybody remember the Kim Potter trial, where she was using a taser? She thought she was using a taser, and she actually deployed her service pistol and killed Dante Wright and was convicted of manslaughter and went to prison?
Okay, so in this particular instance, what Andrew's referring to here is a case that happened several years back, and it was a law enforcement case by a law enforcement officer, where a law enforcement officer was wearing, of course, an actual pistol and wearing a taser in what was known as, or still is known as, a cross-draw carry position, where they would still utilize their dominant hand to draw the electroconductive weapon with their strong hand, but from a different part in their belt, and deploy it that way. And we've seen this. This is not the only case. We've seen this, I think the last count was somewhere around 18 times throughout the U.S., where an officer has mistaked an electroconductive weapon, an ECW, for their pistol, or mistake their pistol for an ECW, and in a non-lethal scenario have drawn their pistol and shot and killed someone on accident. And he's referring to this case, basically talking about how the Byrna looks like a pistol and people are going to mistake it, the user is going to mistake it for a deadly weapon. And I think that this there's kind of two aspects to this, and I'm going to talk about the law enforcement aspect, and then I think Luan can kind of talk about the civilian aspect. But I can tell you, we utilize this case when we train law enforcement officers with Byrna. We actually utilize this case as a case example. And one of the reasons that when we teach law enforcement, we actually compel a support side carry and support side draw in order to mitigate the chance of weapon confusion. It has nothing to do with what the weapon looks like. It's how the weapon's drawn, where the weapon's located, and an actual physical difference between how it is utilized in the user's body, which is necessary for law enforcement officers when they're carrying a pistol, a deadly weapon, and they're carrying less lethal. Luan, you want to kind of talk about, on the civilian side, about weapon confusion and just the lack of instances of that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, as a person, as you know, Josh, I carry both. And I carry my SIG 365 and my Byrna SD, now LE, just depending on how much stuff I have in my bag. But I deliberately place both weapons in their respective pockets. And so, there's the SIG goes into the top pocket, the Byrna goes into the main pocket, because that's going to be my first draw of choice, my weapon that I draw out. I also make it very purposeful to train, and I know the difference between what my Byrna feels like. I feel that really, rubbery tactical grip versus the grip that I have in the SIG, and then also, the width of the pistol, so you will. And so I know, without having to do a visual inspection, what weapon I'm pulling out from my bag. And so those that are carrying lethal and less lethal, you need to train. And we always enforce and reinforce the importance of practice drawing. And we laugh about it. Our wives look at us, like we're weirdos when we're sitting there watching TV and practicing, our pulling our weapons. So, but that's important. You need muscle memory. And so if you're going to take a lethal weapon and carry it, whether it's have it in your home or have it on your body when you're out and about, you have to go through the proper training, processes to make sure that you don't make those types of mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. It really comes down to a training issue. And on the law enforcement side, we have a lot more control of that because we certify law enforcement officers to carry that. So we can really kind of, direct that training so that they understand the importance of mitigating that chance of weapon confusion. And we teach them how to do that. We teach them the best methods known in order to mitigate that and hope that they continue to carry that out. But on the civilian side, we don't have that. You can't, you're not going to certify them to carry it. It's their right. If they want to carry it, they can carry it. So like you said, it's so important that they are out there doing that training, that they're out there standing in their living room and doing those draw drills to make sure that they understand that. But you're also right, and there's far less chance of weapon confusion on the civilian side, even if you're carrying both, just in the manner that you're carrying it. You're most likely not carrying it on a belt, exterior, open carrying right next to each other.
And then, the way I train, come out of my bedroom, if there are people in my home, I deliberately go for the Byrna first. And even if it's, a low light situation, there is no pistol that I own that has a honeycomb grip other than the Byrna launch. So you have to be familiar with it. If you can't distinguish one from the other, guess what? You're not training them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's, I understand that not everybody has the time to do certain things and to train as much as they want in certain areas, but when it comes to the self-defense of yourself and your family, that's something that you need to put some time in.
I mean, I don't have time to bad excuse. How many times have I told you, I don't have time to go running like you do, and you kind of give me that stare, right? Sure you do one. So if this is a matter of life or death and protecting your family, you better find time, or don't have any of these weapons in your home.
It's all about priorities. What am I going to prioritize, and this needs to take priority. So, and that kind of leads us into the next point I want to bring up.
Here's one from today's news. 17 hours ago, this news report was published. From Virginia, man 21 dies after accidental shooting in Manassas area home. Second man charged. What was he charged with? The second man? involuntary manslaughter. Is there any evidence that he intended to shoot the victim in this case? No, none. They were passing the gun around. The gun discharged when it was in the second man's hands and killed this victim. And he's charged now, the second man, the man who was holding the gun, with involuntary manslaughter. Why? Because he was handling a gun, an inherently dangerous instrument, by definition in an unsafe manner, because it discharged unintentionally. The gun does not shoot itself, folks. That trigger must be depressed. So obviously he depressed the trigger while the muzzle was pointed at someone who did not need to be shot. Involuntary manslaughter for an unintentional shooting. So one concern I've always had with the Byrna design is that someone, the user, might think they're handling a Byrna pistol, but in fact be handling a real pistol under the stress that accompanies an attack.
So, Andrew talks, and he does this several times throughout this, throughout his video, and he talks about, people accidentally discharging a gun and how dangerous it is for an untrained person to handle a gun, a firearm in a dangerous manner. And I sit here and watch this and don't understand how he doesn't understand that he's proving our point and why it's so important for weapons and self-defense tools like the Byrna to exist for situations just like this. If those people were not comfortable with a gun, with a firearm, and they're obviously passing it around, if that had been a Byrna, nobody would have been dead. Nobody would have been charged with anything. They would have had a bad, 45 minutes to an hour, and then they would have ate dinner and gone home. And I don't understand the confusion here and why he believes that Byrna is such a bad idea when he highlights cases where this happens.
I mean, I only, when I'm listening to that, the Fantastic Four comes in my mind, where like he's that Mr. Stretch guy. Like, you're really stretching for a rationale here that makes zero sense. First of all, if you are a responsible gun owner or Byrna owner, you shouldn't be passing around like it was some sort of toy. It needs to be treated as a weapon. And so the weapons confusion thing is also hard to connect, because if you're passing around, you should know one is a Byrna and one is a 9mm or a handgun, because each brand clearly has their trademarks on each of these weapons. So you absolutely have to be foolish or blind or doing it in the dark.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you said, it's a stretch, and it's a hard concept to think that the Byrna would have been any worse in this situation than what happened. I mean, this is obviously a static situation where people are just passing a gun around, but look at the cases that we've seen where people were accidentally shot, family members are accidentally shot by their own family, thinking that they were intruders.
I mean, sorry to interrupt. These are, so far, the first two are very obscure and borderline ridiculous.
Yeah, we're talking about edge cases here, and he is citing several edge cases, which I think is, like you said, is a stretch, and we can talk about edge cases all day. There's always going to be exceptions to everything, very, very small anomalies to the rule, and I think it's taking away from the vast amount of people that utilize these things in the manner in which they were intended.
I mean, like, we always do risk assessment, right? As your former SWAT guy, I'm sure you guys did that as well. And so he's taking these obscurities, the very likelihood, like we say, likelihood of you having to use your lethal firearm in self-defense situation is 0.001%.
Or less,
right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what he's calling out, and he's using that to, deliver a message that is based on, these facts that are very unlikely to happen.
He goes on, the kinetic rounds use pain compliance to stop an attacker. Many people, when shot with a kinetic round, will think they have been shot with an actual firearm. based on the look of the weapon, the sound of the report, and the pain of being hit. Okay, so this is me talking now. Is that a good thing? Because presumably you're using a less lethal weapon because you're facing a less lethal threat, or you'd be going to the gun. So if someone's only threatening you with less lethal force and you've apparently shot them, what do you think they think they're privileged to do lawfully now?
So in this instance, Andrew's talking about, we've had several people call us both on the law enforcement and the civilian side and say, hey, I utilized this, the Byrna, whether it was one of the handheld launchers or the rifle launchers, and it got the assailant to stop their behavior. And then when we talked to them, they thought they had been shot. So they stopped, they went down, they gave up, they surrendered. And Andrew's basically saying that this is a bad thing and that it may solicit some elevated behavior from that suspect. And after seeing some videos on my end, especially on law enforcement side with body cams, there have been certain people that think that they have been shot and they immediately stop. And that's the whole point. When we utilize force against somebody, whether it's on the law enforcement side, whether it's on the civilian side, the goal is never to kill or maim or just absolutely destroy somebody. The goal is to get them to stop their assaultive behavior. Whatever they're doing, I want them to stop doing that and allow me to, on the civilian side, facilitate my escape, or on the law enforcement side to facilitate an apprehension. If they surrender immediately because they think they have been shot, mission accomplished. We have done our job, and we've done it without actually shooting them. So he equates this to something bad and says, oh, well, then now they're, this gives them the green light to use some other force. But that's, once again, man, we're talking about such small chances of that happening.
I think, I applaud Andrew for applying his law degree to twist a few words and to really misrepresent the situation. But back to, you shouldn't be using the Byrna in an aggressive manner or an offensive manner. This is a pure self-defense weapon. So that makes zero sense. And, I would say the person that has that Byrna barrel staring at them and they're being used, and it's being used aggressively, do what you got to do, right? So that argument is making sense.
And I can tell you from, better part of 2 decades of law enforcement and seeing hundreds, probably thousands of robberies, of personal robberies and even home invasions and whatnot, none of them, I'm racking my brain and I cannot think of one where the assailant started with a lower level of force and then upped that level of force. They always start with the highest they got. So if that means they're not going to come up to you and just say, hey, give me your money, and then when you resist, pull out a knife, and then when you resist more, pull out a gun. If they have a gun, they're starting with the gun. It's going to come up and it's going to be, give me your money, and that's where the line is, and that's how you know how to respond. I have never seen a suspect, escalate that level of force throughout the confrontation. Could it happen? Sure. But once again, we're talking about these extraordinarily small chances, and they're just not likely.
Even real handguns are pretty crappy when it comes to stopping a motivated aggressor. So I presume that a non-penetrating Byrna kinetic round is inferior in stopping power to a real 9mm bullet. So I don't understand this mindset. If you're facing a deadly force threat, an imminent deadly force threat that cannot be otherwise avoided, it's imminent, it's immediately about to happen or in progress, the appropriate tactical response is deadly defensive force.
Can I answer that first?
Yeah, please.
So my response would be if it's imminent threat, duh! You have a firearm, use your firearm. That doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. I would do that in my position. But, when you're not, or when you don't have a lethal response, and you have nothing, a Byrna is better than nothing. And he needs to research the terms of our ammo a little bit better before he speaks on them as an expert, because the kinetic is a pure polymer round that is essentially pain deterrent. And the inert rounds are talcum powder training rounds that law enforcement use. So they have literal effect. So if you're using max round that contains tear gas or CSOC scientifically, you will, if you deploy it correctly and it's a hit, you will take away his vision, his ability to breathe, and all of these other things that happen to the attacker. So if your vision is impaired, you cannot see, your skin is on fire, your nose is running uncontrollably, where are you shooting? And so, and the purpose is not for the person that deployed those rounds to stay around, find out. All you're doing is incapacitating this attacker and getting away. And then, like in this case, and I always stress this, and I as a gun owner and a CCW carrier, if I decide to play God, and in this case, judge and jury of someone's life, I know consequences around defending that is going to be very severe. I don't care what state you live in, you're going to have to go to the ringer and prove to a jury why you decided to play God.
Yeah, I think that this, once again, he's trying to put Byrna into a role that we have never purported it or designed it or advocated for it to be in. No, like you said, if you are presented with a deadly force threat and you have the opportunity to respond utilizing, up to deadly force, then you need to do that. But if you don't, and the reason that you don't is one of several, either you can't or you choose not to, having any kind of response, any kind of resistance is better than having no resistance. And we've seen that so many times, that any resistance at all, even against somebody that has the capability to cause a deadly threat, any response, a lot of times will get them to retreat, even if they have, even if they have a gun, even if they have the ability to utilize deadly force. That literally throwing a chair at them or any kind of resistance, they're looking for a weak target. They're looking for somebody that can't give them any resistance at all. And the minute that they meet that resistance, they just don't know what to do, and so they retreat and facilitate and allow your escape. So
there are many scenarios where there are people that can't have access to a firearm.
A lot,
right?
Depending on
Or
where they
you're a
live,
felon,
their criminal history,
you're a minor, or whatever. And so this bad guy is in your house, and you're home alone. If this is the only thing that you have, it's better than nothing. And if you don't have a firearm, like I said, we discussed it before. Use a firearm you have, but it's kind of preposterous to say like that's the only solution, and you got to use a gun. Like, of course you would.
But in any case, with a 60-foot range, no recoil, and the ability to mount the laser sight, the Byrna has the accuracy and stopping power to disarm a threat before the situation escalates out of control. You mentioned that you also carry pepper spray. Pepper spray, while effective when deployed properly, is, as you know, a close-quarter combat device. By the time it is effective, the situation has escalated way out of control. So I have to ask here, who are you shooting with a Byrna who's 60 feet away? What threat is someone who's 60 feet away?
So, in this clip, and he expands on both sides about engaging a threat at a greater distance, and how is that defensive? And, this brings up a very good point as to what we're trying to do here at Byrna. And once again, he's kind of trying to pigeonhole us into deadly force. What deadly force is 60 feet away if they don't have a gun? Basically, if you listen, he talks about, like, if they don't have a gun, then how are they a threat? And that's, once again, not understanding the context of where Byrna and where less lethal self-defense fits in. Listen, we've all probably experienced that person or that threat that you're walking through that dark parking lot late at night. I use this with the civilian classes and all that a lot. That female that's leaving Target right when they close at 10 o'clock, and it's the only she's the only car in the lot, and she's walking through the lot, and she sees that creepy guy that's closing on her from the other side of that parking lot. And she sees it, and at first it's like, well, that's kind of out of place, but I don't know what's going on. And then all of a sudden it becomes very apparent. She changes direction, he changes with her. She changes direction again, he changes with her. And then he starts saying something, but he's 70, 80 feet away. It's obvious that there's something nefarious going on here. Having a less lethal tool like Byrna that can engage at that distance, look, at that point, if you can articulate that they are a threat, not a deadly threat, if you can articulate that it's likely, it's reasonable to believe that they're going to cause you harm, then you can use lower levels of force like that with a Byrna. So it would be completely reasonable at that point. Yeah, he's 75 feet away. To stop, draw your Byrna and say, don't get any closer to me. And then if he continues, that strengthens your argument that you can articulate that he was a threat, and then you can start engaging. That's the whole point of what we're trying to do. Why would you let a threat get to you? Why would you let it get to 5 feet, to 10 feet, when you can address it much, much earlier, thereby facilitating your escape and stopping it from escalating?
Again, he does an interesting job of skewing the narrative, right? Oh, the Byrna has a 60-foot effective range. It's not even a threat. But you're advocating for firearms, which is the distance, effective range of much greater distances. So what side are you on? Because I guarantee you that my 9mm would travel a much further distance, which again is ridiculous. And then B,
trying to spin, he's trying to put that says, oh, if they don't have a gun, then how are they a threat from 60 feet? A lot of ways. I can tell you, a lot of ways. But they don't have to be a deadly threat. There's so many lower levels.
As you mentioned, right, I want to re-emphasize it, if you pull out your lethal firearm, you have to prove imminent threat. If you are with the Byrna, you just need to be threatened, then you could deploy less lethal response. And so that's what you want, because look, if some guy was threatening you from 60 feet away and you pulled out your firearm and you call in to your local police department and said, yes, that I pulled out my weapon because this guy from 60 feet away was threatening me. And I think the first thing they say is, why don't you come to the station, why don't we talk about it? And then when you get there, they'll hit you with a negligent use of a firearm. Because you don't want you to be whipping out your gun on any incident, right? Because there's a possibility that you may discharge it on accident or whatever, and you can create some damage. And then your CCW will be revoked and all of that, and you're going to be dealing with legal issues. So,
yeah, it's just it's having to understand how to articulate and how to explain why you felt that yourself was in danger, and not necessarily deadly force, but any kind of force. That's the whole point. Is we provide. If you were carrying a gun, you may have to wait. He doesn't have a gun out. Okay, he's 60 feet away, but he looks super scary. And, well, now I need to wait for him to get closer, and now I got to wait for him to get closer, and now I got to wait until he's 5 feet away and produces some kind of weapon before I would be authorized, maybe, before it would even be close to be presumed reasonable to use deadly force. And now at that point, I've put myself at such great danger. So it's just understanding how the Byrna can give you better options to
I mean, it reminds me of an incident, not an incident, a time when I was at the range and I was practicing with my 9mm, for the target that was, with the standoff of 5 feet. And this guy comes to my lane and starts laughing. Like, why are you practicing so close? And I said, look, the only time if I have to draw my lethal firearm is when that imminent threat is within this distance. That's when I know I have a high confidence of hitting this guy in the thoracic area without flipping out and sending a wrong shot down the line and hitting an innocent bystander or property or whatever. And then people think that, when I train at distance. No, you got to train in proximity of the threat, because again.
Well, and let's look at the statistics. We all, in law enforcement, and this was, in law enforcement, even outside of law enforcement, it's the rule of threes. Gunfights happen, and then the rule of threes: 3 yards, 3 seconds, and 3 rounds. And that's generally, statistically speaking, that's how the vast majority will take place. So you have to understand that. So by given that ability to engage with so many more options at such a greater distance, we're trying to prevent that, and we're doing a good job of it. So that concludes part 1 of Luan and I's discussion on the law of self-defense and Andrew's review of some of the Byrna products and just really trying to clear up a lot of those out of context issues and just really some of the errors as well. In part 2, we're going to talk about 12 gauge and then some just wild inaccuracies that he believes about Byrna and the products. So make sure you're staying tuned for that. Subscribing to our podcast on all major podcast platforms, as well as YouTube and our social channels, Instagram and Facebook, so that when the time comes, you are prepared to defend.